Hey, Assalamu alaikum, guys. So I hope everyone is well. Today, I want to sort of try to, as briefly as we can, go through sharing some thoughts on the debate between Deepak Chopra and Richard Dawkins that took place, I believe, in 2017. Now, the reason I wanted to go over this and share some or cover some sections, and we'll watch it through and I'll share my thoughts as we go along, was because there are some really interesting topics that are discussed from two really interesting perspectives. So the first perspective is obviously Richard Dawkins, or one of the perspectives is Richard Dawkins' perspective, which is who is a naturalist, who is an atheist, who therefore sees the world from a very specific lens, through a very specific lens of naturalism. And the other is of Deepak Chopra, who is more of he's an interesting type of character. And the debate, this particular debate got interesting at certain points. You can see Richard Dawkins getting really upset because he was taking the discussion or conducting the discussion from more of a he was injecting in mysticism, a little bit of spirituality and things like this, which Richard Dawkins didn't like, obviously, and didn't want to engage with. So and to top it all off, both of these guys are scientists, right? I believe both are biologists. Deepak Chopra is a biologist as well. Um, so one of the things it also does is it highlights how you can have scientists who may come from the same discipline, but because they have different backgrounds and different ways of looking at the world and different worldviews, they bring their own bias into the discussion, and they see things differently. They see things differently even when they're working with the same thing. So they may be working with the same data, but because of their background, they see things differently. And this is very important as well, because when it comes to science, a lot of the things we hear on a popular level online, especially as Muslims, when we watch these videos of scientists talking about evolution and so on and so forth, in most cases, we're listening to atheist scientists, and that has a bearing. That does make a difference, because when they speak about evolution, they are going to speak about evolution from their paradigm, their naturalistic way of looking at things. The way they connect the dots is going to be the way that suits their worldview. Whereas someone like Deepak Chopra, who is also a scientist but comes from a different type of background, isn't a naturalist, he would connect the dots differently. So this shows us that there is bias also at play. So anyway, I'm gonna get to start playing this, inshallah. Walaikum salam to everyone that's joined, and let's start working through this. There's some sections I'm gonna skip to, and we can go through those, inshallah. So let's set this up in a way you guys can see the screen. Okay.
Is it ever enough simply not to believe? What else can one believe in? Okay, so let me start out by saying that, in my opinion, all belief is a cover up for insecurity. All belief. If I asked you, do you believe in electricity or gravity, you would find that a ridiculous question. So I'm not here to convince you that you should believe in anything, especially the supernatural. I'm here to ask you the most fundamental question that was posed earlier. Does the universe have a purpose? And there are two ways of looking at it. If you look at it from the top down, from the point of view of biological organisms, it looks like biological organisms are purpose-driven. Even a nematode or a small microorganism has some kind of sentience. It senses the environment, it processes it, it gets away from predators, it looks for food. So, to me, biological organisms are purpose-driven, there's no question. In the human nervous system, that takes on questions like, do I have a soul? Does God exist? What is the meaning of life? Why is there a universe? Why is there awareness? Is there truth, goodness, beauty, harmony? Is evolution merely random mutations and natural selection? Or could there be other factors? Could it be guided by awareness and behavior? These questions occur to human beings. But I would say all organisms are purpose-driven. Now, when you look at this from the bottom up, from the point of view of individual particles coming out of the so-called quantum vacuum, there seems to be no purpose. It seems to be totally random for the individual particles that emerge from the infinite void, you might say, purposely, without purpose. But when you look at the sum total of their activity, you have a universe. You have constants that fine-tune the universe to be what it is. You have precise laws of nature which make sense to a rational human being. So I think even from the bottom up, I'm compelled to say that there's an organizing intelligence, there's a deeper consciousness that throws out this universe at the speed of light.
Sorry,
from nothing.
Dr. Chopra. Time is over. Thank you very much.
Okay, just before we move on to Richard Dawkins' perspective, so what they're obviously discussing is the purpose of, well, the purpose behind the universe, and Deepak's position seems to be that everything has a purpose. The universe itself has a purpose. Every atom, every cell has a purpose. So we can agree with all of this. It makes sense. It's when later on in the discussion where things get a bit interesting, but his points are all valid here from the perspective that, look, when we look at the universe, when we observe the universe, we can see that it's purpose driven. It's quite obvious. And even as human beings, which are the result of the universe, we also are purpose driven. And not only this, but we see the universe through the lens of purpose and meaning, right? We seek out purpose. We look at things, we study things, and we seek to discover the purpose behind those things. So this is very interesting. And the sort of inference he's making based on his observations of what science is showing us is that there seems to be something behind all of this. Okay, there seems to be something behind all of this entire universe and the order within the universe. Now, what's really interesting is that, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights these two different aspects of the universe. Allah highlights the creation and the order of the creation, the function of the creation. That's really interesting. I mean, even in the third chapter of the Quran, Al Imran, there's verse 190 is a very powerful ayah in the Quran, right? Where Allah says, indeed, without a shadow of a doubt, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and then Allah says, and in the alternation of the night and day are signs. Now, there's two things that are mentioned in this ayah, which number one is, well, there is stuff that exists out there. There is creation. There is matter. There is the physical universe, whichever way you want to look at it. So that exists. And then the second thing God highlights is in the alternation of the night and day. Now, the alternation of the night and day specifically are the functions, is the function of this matter. So the Quran alludes to this. It's very interesting that there is creation, there is matter, and then there is a function. This matter is organized in a very specific way, and it's functioning in a very specific way. And both of these things, when you see them together and you bring them together, really, I mean, press an individual to acknowledge and recognize, well, there must be something behind this, because it's not just random matter, right? Well, that's what should be the case, because if everything was a result of just, nothing, or came about by chance and there is nothing behind it, then you wouldn't expect this matter that came into existence at the beginning of the universe to be ordered in any specific way and to be functioning. But we do see that not only did matter come into existence, but then there were laws. He mentions, I believe, the laws as well, that there were the laws of physics, that we will, or patterns we perceive within the world, which we refer to as laws, which result in this matter being organized in a specific way, and it functions in a specific way. Now that really, I mean, if we sit and think about that, anyone, even an atheist, if he sits and thinks about that, then look, not only does the universe exist, but the universe is functioning in a particular way, that should really get them to ask the bigger questions. Well, there must be something, will get them to think or realize there must be something behind all of this. So that seems to be Deepak's position here, which is that there seems to be an inherent order and purpose behind the entire universe, the universe itself.
Un aplauso, por favor. So now
there is no question but that
you have 90 seconds, please.
there is no
90 segundos en el reloj.
There is no question, of course, but that individual organisms, nematode worms, birds, kangaroos, anything you like, behaves as if they have a purpose. You described apparent sentience on the part of worms. They react to stimuli, they approach things. Individual organisms, animals, plants, bacteria, all behave as if they have a purpose. That's precisely the problem that Darwin solved. Why do living things look as though they've got a purpose? Darwin showed showed the answer to that problem was evolution by natural selection. But that's a very, very different matter from saying that the universe has a purpose. This is a complete confusion of scale. Individual organisms have a purpose for reasons we understand very well, Darwinian reasons, but that is 100 miles, 1,000,000 miles from saying that something like the universe has a purpose. Purpose came into the universe late. It came into the universe late after the Darwinian process had got going, had produced nervous systems, had produced brains. Brains are things that have purposes. Brains have purposes. Brains, in the case of human brains, make machines which also have purposes. But that's the correct understanding of purpose to put.
Right. Okay. So, guys, this is very interesting. And Dawkins is being very careful with the way he's presenting his ideas here. And I want us to really understand this. Firstly, he acknowledges at least the appearance of purpose. Right? There's the appearance of purpose. That's what he says. It looks like there is purpose, but he very quickly boils this down to biology. Right? It's an evolutionary explanation. That's what he gives to this purpose. Okay. Now he's not saying exactly what that is, what he means by that. He may go into a bit of detail as we go along, but what he's essentially alluding to is that, well, the purpose from an evolutionary perspective is survival and reproduction. It's survival, right? And that's coupled with reproduction. That is the fundamental purpose of biology, according from his perspective. And also then he speaks about brains evolve and brains have a purpose. Now, again, he moves on swiftly to talking about how we produce machines, etc. But he doesn't, and I don't know if Deepak's going to pick him out on this, but he doesn't clarify then, well, even though brains are these highly evolved organisms or these highly evolved organs of a human organism, what is their purpose according to Dawkins? And if you watch some of his other videos, well, he will still have to boil down the human purpose to biology, which is what? It's survival and reproduction. That's it. From his naturalistic evolutionary perspective, that's all it boils down to. Whether it's a cell or a human with a highly evolved brain, it doesn't matter. The fundamental purpose, if you peg it to evolution, is survival and reproduction. Right? Now, I can see why he may not want to give that clarity here, because it can land him into a really tricky situation later on in the debate. But that's what he's alluding to. So that seems to be his position, which again highlights, Dawkins is coming from a purely atheistic, naturalistic perspective, and Deepak seems to be a bit more flexible. He's not a naturalist, obviously. He seems to, I don't actually know what his, I know he talks a lot about consciousness, and he talks a lot about transcendence, and he talks about, spirituality. I don't know his exact position, but he seems to be coming from this specific perspective. And what this is going to do for Deepak as we watch further is it's going to allow him to be a lot more flexible as far as his explanations are concerned in regards to these things. Whereas Dawkins is going to have to stick to and defend his naturalistic way of looking at things, which is going to land him in some tricky situations when it comes to the fine-tuning of the universe and so on.
Push purpose back to the universe itself is to make a complete confusion.
He's also here denying that, you know, the universe has a purpose. You know, he has a point here, but I don't think Deepak's making this point. So he's in a way straw manning Deepak's position, because what he's trying to argue is just because we see purpose on a biological level, or the appearance of purpose, it doesn't mean that the universe necessarily has a purpose, but it also doesn't mean that it doesn't, right? So right now, as far as this debate is concerned, they can't argue either way, right? Whether the universe has a purpose or not.
Deepak, 60 seconds.
I think the confusion is because Dr. Dawkins looks at biological organisms as separate from the universe and not as activities of the universe. You and I right now are an activity of the universe. And as an activity of the universe, we are expressing purpose. But Dr. Dawkins did not address why the universe is fine-tuned so that we can have this conversation.
So Deepak's made a really interesting point here. It's a really interesting, it's actually quite a good point, where he's saying, well, Dawkins is separating biology from the rest of the universe, whereas any biological organism is essentially a part of the universe. And therefore, if the biological organism has purpose and purpose emerges within biology, well, then it's originally coming from the material universe anyway. It's an extension or an extraction from it. So he's arguing this way, which is an interesting point. It's not definitive, but it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Why are the laws so rational? What is the origin of these laws? To bypass that, we would have to propose 10 to the power of 500 universes that randomly arise from nothing. Not only is the universe arising from nothing, but this nothing seems to be the womb of creation, where nature goes to the same place to create a galaxy of stars or an electrochemical impulse in your own neural networks.
Thank you very much. We have two options. One is, now we take another ball and now you make him a question, or we give each of you 1 more minute to keep talking in depth about this important concern. Would you rather that?
Yeah.
Por favor, pongan otra vez. You will have 3 minutes and you 3 minutes, okay? Por favor, 3 minutos, please.
The issue of the fine-tuning of the universe, of course, is a completely different one, and it's a very interesting one which we can talk about. However, that was not what you were originally talking about. You were originally talking about the apparent purposefulness of living organisms, which is striking. I mean, it's a very, very important aspect of living things. That's why we needed Darwin to explain it. Darwin did explain it. Darwin explained how, starting with no purpose at all, nothing that you could call purpose, the laws of physics, working through this remarkable process called evolution by natural selection, gave rise to cells, to nerve cells, to nervous systems, to brains, to the illusion of purpose. Well, indeed, the very genuine purpose, because in living things, purpose is a very genuine phenomenon. We understand how it happened. It happened because of evolution. Now, to go back to the universe.
So just before we move on to the fine-tuning of the universe, again, you know, this is, I mean, it's so important, guys, to whenever we watch these debates, is to really, because sometimes we just listen to what he's saying and we see that he's being very confident. He's very sort of, dominant in the way he speaks and he gets his points across. We get impressed by this. It's very important to realize, you know, what he's actually saying and really analyze it. So the first thing, if you notice, it's not the first time, but he's really invoked Darwin, right? And if you notice the way he speaks about Darwin, and this is the thing with atheists as well, is Darwin is like, I mean, if you go beyond the sort of sphere of science for a second, and that he was a scientist, Darwin for the atheists is like a god, right? He's like a god. And the reason is because he has given them a lifeline, according to them, which is he's given them an account for to explain not the origins of human life, but how human life developed, or how humans came to be from previous life forms. Without Darwin and his theory, they're in deep water. They don't know, they have nowhere to go. So he is the person that provided them with a doctrine, right? Gave them a doctrine to be able to explain things from their perspective. Although, you know, Darwin is I think Sabur mentioned this as well. Darwin wasn't a you know, an atheist, or a staunch atheist at least, you know, and he was definitely probably not a naturalist. But I mean, they hold on to him, and it's another thing we need to realize here is that, look, you'll notice this over and over again, and you'll see it with Dawkins in this debate as well. He'll get very angry very soon, shortly, right? He gets really annoyed. He's holding his head. He's frustrated. You see this with atheists when you speak about science and you discuss science with them, especially the philosophy of science, and you highlight the limitations of science and the scientific method, they get really angry. They get really annoyed. And I believe that one of the reasons is because atheists have taken science as a religion. They have taken science as a religion. Science is their religion. Darwin, in a way, is their God, and Dawkins is their most recent prophet. Right? This is one way you can see it. He is their prophet. Their testimony of faith, if you like, is, you know, their shahada is science is the only way to truth. Right? This is their shahada. And one of their fundamental doctrines, their tenets of belief, almost, if you like, the equivalent of our understanding of Tawheed, their fundamental doctrine is evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution, because it provides an account for them, you know. So I mean, so you can start to, if you see it like that, you can start to see why they get so annoyed and upset when you really challenge the foundations of science, not in a negative way, just highlight to them the limitations of science, and they get really upset, right? So this is something we need to keep in mind, because you'll see this, but you may not understand it sometimes. Oh, why are these atheists getting so upset for? Well, I'm just trying to highlight to them just the nature of science, what the philosophers of science are saying, that science has limitations, that science only deals with the physical material world, that science can only tell you about what's observable, that science is based on induction. They don't like this stuff because you're challenging their religion, you know, and they don't like this. Anyway, let's move on to the fine-tuning point.
Universe is another matter entirely. And now you've changed the subject and talked about the alleged fine-tuning of the universe, which is a very important and interesting question. One that
so Dawkins is asserting here that Deepak Chopra is changing the subject. Now, to a degree, yes, but I think there is a logical follow-through with the fine-tuning in regards to what he was saying previously. Because if you're looking at the purpose and order of biology on a biological level, well, then you can't run away from the fact that that requires fundamentally the universe to have order, to be ordered, to be fine-tuned in a way which allows for, firstly, life to come into existence. So these points are linked. It's not necessarily changing the subject to the degree that Dawkins is trying to suggest.
It is the province of physics. You and I are both biologists, not physicists, but we can have a go at talking about it. Some physicists have alleged that the fundamental constants of the universe are very fine-tuned, such that if any of them were any different, the universe would not come into being the way that it is, and we wouldn't have stars, we wouldn't have galaxies, we wouldn't have chemistry, we wouldn't have life, and we wouldn't have us. Some physicists dispute the alleged fine-tuning. Other physicists say that we don't yet understand enough about physics in order to know where those fundamental constants come from. Yet other physicists still talk about a multiverse in which there's a very large number of universes, and most of those universes do not have the physical constants tuned in order to give rise to us, but a tiny minority do, and by the anthropic principle, we clearly have to be in one of those universes that does have those properties. 3 minutes is an absurdly short.
So I think he's misapplied the anthropic principle here as well. So, but let's break this down, because he's given us a lot here to deal with. Yeah. First thing I want you guys to notice, and let's look at the psychology here for a second. The fine tuning of the universe. I mean, it's something that majority of the recognized physicists and scientists of any caliber would recognize, well, there is fine tuning, what they refer to as fine tuning, right? So there are certain constants and certain quantities which are precisely dialed in, and not only in and of themselves, but in line with each other, which allow for intelligent life to come about, right? You can't run away from this fact. Dawkins, in a very eloquent way, tries to dilute this by highlighting the opinions of different scientists. There are some scientists who say this, but there are some scientists who deny it, but there are some scientists who... So he's trying to dilute this point now. When there may be a small group of scientists who don't deny the fine-tuning of the universe, but I mean, the majority of the scientists would recognize it, at least to some degree. You can't run away from this, right? There is what they refer to as fine-tuning of constants and quantities, right? So that's the first thing to highlight here. So he's very good with his words. I mean, he's a good writer, but he's very good with the way he presents his points as well, and he's good at masking things. The second thing in regards to the anthropic principle, I don't think he's applied it properly. The anthropic principle is simply suggests that we shouldn't be surprised that the universe allows for intelligent life to exist because it exists, because we're here. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're here. That's the anthropic principle. But the problem is, it's like this. Hamza gives a really good analogy in his book, The Divine Reality. He says, look, imagine I don't know if it exactly flows this way, but we'll go with this example. Imagine you're kidnapped, and someone puts a bag over your head, takes you away somewhere, and the next thing you know, they remove the bag, and you're standing in this open field against the wall, okay? And in front of you, there's 100 trained marksmen, right? They're all snipers. They all have guns, and they're pointing the gun at you, okay? All of them, and they're laser guided guns, and the laser point you can see is pointing at your chest and at your head. All of them have targeted your chest and your head. And these are trained marksmen. These are trained shooters. Okay. Now you hear someone call out 3, 2, 1, and all of them pull the trigger, and you hear the bang. You hear the sound of the guns going off, and the next thing you know is you're alive. Now, what they're saying when they make an appeal to the anthropic principle is, well, they're saying you shouldn't be surprised that you're alive. Well, because you're alive. Well, that's true. However, you should be surprised, and you should ask the question, or you should wonder, how in the world did they miss? These trained marksmen that had laser pointed guns at my chest and my head, how did they miss? Why did they miss? These are real questions that we need to answer. So when it comes to the universe, when it comes to the fine tuning of the universe, the constant quantities that are in place, precisely dialed in, okay, we're here and they are there, and we shouldn't be surprised about that, but it should lead to this wondrous question: why are they fine-tuned in the way they're fine-tuned? Because they could have been fine-tuned any other way as well. They didn't have to be. These constants and quantities could have been fine-tuned in any other way, right? They're precisely dialed in. The figures could have been off by 1 degree or whatever unit they use, right? Now, if they could have been any other way and they are this way, well, then it begs the question: why are they tuned to this degree as opposed to any other degree, right? So that is a genuine question, and that raises genuine questions that need to be answered. So I think he's misapplying the point here, or he's really, again, diluting the point here.
More time in which to talk about this, and it wasn't the original question, but perhaps we can come back to it with a later discussion.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, so he's decided to move on.
Dr. Chopra, he just want to use 2 minutes. You have 3 minutes like he had.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
See, if I was in Deepak's position, I would really press the point here, and really try to expose some of what he's just done. So let's see if Deepak, pins him, doesn't let him go.
So Dr. Dawkins, you and I are both...
He's quite good at doing this, by the way.
Biological backgrounds. We have both dabbled a little bit in quantum physics. I have to say that my current book is co-authored by a chaired professor in genetics and neuroscience at Harvard. I am writing and have papers accepted in professional journals on quantum biology and neuroscience, and I can give you the citations later. But there's a school of scientists who believe that if you look across the universe, it shows the following properties: sentience at all levels. By sentience, I mean the ability to sense information, process it, and come up with an intelligent response. Complementarity at all levels, which means that the universe is empirical, but most of it is actually non-empirical, non-observable. It is wave-like. When you don't know where these waves are, they'd have no units of mass and energy, and it is particle-like, there are which have units of mass and energy. So it gets weird at this level, but it also seems to be self-organizing. It seems to be self-regulating. It seems to be self-evolving. It's an evolution. Of course, I'm not arguing with you that Darwin is right or wrong. I think Darwin made the most major contribution that we can have to our understanding of the evolution of species. But that's not the question. The question is, does evolution itself have a purpose? And I think, yes, evolution has a purpose. It's evolution itself. Evolution is guided by awareness, by consciousness, and the purpose of evolution is maximum diversity, because that's what we see in the universe. And what we experience as perceptual phenomena are not fundamental reality at all, because every species has its own perceptual experience of the universe. These scientists that I work with say that awareness is a singularity, perceptual experiences are many, and the evolution of species is actually the evolution of consciousness to express itself as multiple observers, multiple modes of observation, and multiple objects of observation. We are the eyes of the universe looking at itself. This brain is the observation deck for the universe to experience itself. That's the purpose.
So some, again, really interesting points made by Deepak. I think one of the things that really is worth emphasizing is, and this is a very important point for Muslims as well, a lot of times Muslims stumble over evolution, right? Because normally the way the atheists present the case is it's either evolution or it's God. You pick, right? As if evolution somehow denies the existence of God. Logically, it doesn't. It doesn't logically follow. It could very well be, if you, for the sake of argument, assume for a second that, you know, the whole process of human development and where we are today in species is exactly the way scientists tell us. It happened exactly the way scientists tell us, which is the Darwinian, through the Darwinian mechanism, we're here because of this, okay? Assume this for a second. Even if that was the case, I think as Deepak mentions, he alludes to, even if that was the case, it does not logically follow that God does not exist, right? If anything, I mean, it just means, well, one way, or a more correct way of looking at it would be that this cause has just used this process to allow for life to develop on Earth. So there is a being that's actually still controlling this process, the one that fine-tuned the universe, that allowed for the right conditions so that this process could begin and develop over time, right? So it doesn't deny God's existence. So to atheists, the first thing would be, well, it's not really about evolution or God, right? It's evolution does not deny God's existence. It just puts a process in place. That's it, at best. So this is something important to highlight as well, especially when we're talking to atheists. Now he's slowly moving on to the discussion on consciousness. I think Southern Mystic said that I don't like speaking about consciousness. No, absolutely. I mean, consciousness is something amazing, and it's one of those. I mean, from an Islamic perspective, could we call it the soul? I don't know. Allah knows best, right? But we are conscious, we are aware. Maybe it's an aspect of the soul. We don't know, but we are aware. We consciously observe the universe. Where you're aware right now, I'm aware right now, and this awareness, this consciousness, I would argue as well that it's something beyond the physical, right? It's interesting because some people like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett would want to suggest that consciousness is an illusion. It's an illusion created by the physical brain. Well, this is problematic from many different perspectives because consciousness comes first. You need consciousness to be able to study the brain and become aware of the brain in the first place. So consciousness precedes your brain. I mean, you need to be consciously aware to be able to study the brain that you're linking to consciousness, right? So that's one thing, which is a problem. And then the second thing is, well, if you refer to your consciousness as an illusion, then that renders it something insignificant. And then if that's the case, well, then when you're studying the brain and trying to make sense of consciousness, you're consciously doing that, but you're doing that through an illusion. Now, what does that mean in regards to what you conclude about the brain and consciousness? Do you see? So it's actually it's a very destructive idea to claim that consciousness is an illusion, because most naturalists have to appeal to that or say that anyway. It's an illusion that's created by the physical brain because they want to run away from having to suggest that the consciousness is an entity in and of itself, which is linked to the brain but distinct at the same time from it. So it's really interesting when you really sort of analyze what they're actually saying and break it down. But anyway, let's carry on.
The scientists that I respect are scientists who work hard to be understood, to use language clearly, to use words correctly, and to understand what is going on. We have been subjected to a kind of word salad of scientific jargon used out of context with inappropriately, apparently uncomprehendingly. There is a deep confusion going on here between the properties of things within the universe and the properties of the universe itself. It is one thing to say that the universe contains objects that have sentience and the various other properties that you mentioned. Of course it contains objects that have sentience. We are among those objects. So are dogs. So are chimpanzees. The universe contains sentience. The universe is not sentient. This is the one thing, Deepak, you seem not to understand. You're constantly confusing explanations at the level of what goes on inside the universe with the universe itself. It's not enough to say the universe contains sentience, contains purpose, etc., and say, therefore, the universe is sentient, the universe is purposeful. Evolution, you say.
So there's something, see, here's where I would slightly, it depends on what Deepak does next, but here's where I'll slightly disagree with Deepak's approach here. Because Dawkins is trying to separate the two. And he's quite clear with this. He's saying, look, just because there's sentience within the universe, there's purpose within the universe, doesn't apply to the universe, okay? Now, Deepak is trying to link the two. He's trying to say, well, if the universe contains things that have purpose and that have sentience, then they are products of the universe, and therefore the universe in a way, and therefore that purpose and that sentience applies to the universe. Now, he's got a valid point, but I would personally press him on, how do you explain or account for the universe which allows for such order and sentience and purpose? That is a big question. How do you account for such a universe which is so precisely fine-tuned, which follows the laws of physics, where there's laws present, laws of physics, mathematics, logic, which allows for this order that we perceive within the universe? How do you account for such a universe? That's the big question here. And I don't know if Deepak's going to ask this question, but that is the fundamental question that I would ask Dawkins. Well, how do you make sense of this universe? How do you account for this universe, which you've acknowledged has fine-tuning, which has laws? And all of these things allow for the development of intelligent life, allow for order, allow for purpose, allow for sentience, all of these types of things, right? So, but let's see where this goes.
It has a purpose, diversity, because what we see is diversity. Of course, what we see is diversity. That's the consequence of evolution. But you mistake when you think
Time.
that evolution is
Time.
driven towards it.
Time is over.
How
Un
much time
applauso.
do I have
One.
to respond? How
Sorry.
much time? So,
One 30 minutes and we,
How much?
please, no 30. It's your turn.
So, Dr. Dawkins, I would like to remind you that ad hominem is a logical fallacy, and that's Science 101. You should know that.
Ad hominem means talking about a
This is
person
my
as an
turn to
individual.
speak, sir. Okay?
He
You
did
accused
attack
me
him.
of jargon.
Maybe not
You accused
personally,
me of
but he did attack him.
misusing language. How many people understood what I was saying?
You're lying.
Okay. Now, I just came back from a conference on science and non-duality, where there were over 300 scientists, biologists, neuroscientists, etc., who totally get this language. So just because it sounds like jargon to you doesn't mean it's jargon. You know, when a doctor speaks to a patient, the patient thinks the doctor is speaking jargon. When a mathematician speaks to people who are not mathematicians, this is an evolving science, sir. We do not know the answers to the two most fundamental questions of existence. Number one, what is the stuff of the universe? We don't know. 96% is dark energy and dark matter. Of the 4% that's atomic, 99% of that is invisible hydrogen and helium.
Time out.
And we don't know why there is awareness. The two most fundamental questions of our existence.
Please.
Of
Uno
course,
30, por favor.
we don't know about dark matter, dark energy. That's why we need more science and better science in order to solve that. You've changed the subject yet again. Let's talk about sentience. You say the universe has sentience. The universe doesn't have sentience. Things in the universe have sentience. Why do you confuse this audience by saying the universe has sentience?
Can you tell me what the composition of the universe is?
That wasn't the question.
No, because you're talking things, right? Things are basically the atomic universe is stardust, and stardust has sentience in you and me. According to people like Freeman Dyson, even atoms have sentience.
Atoms have no sentience.
You disagree with Freeman Dyson?
Yeah, if that's what he says, which I doubt, I disagree with him. Atoms do not have sentience. Atoms contribute to making brains. Brains have sentience. You need a highly complicated organization.
I think Deepak's view seems in. See, when it comes to the discussion of consciousness, there's many different views amongst the scientists. Like how do you break it down? Is consciousness only on the level of the human being, which is us, or can you reduce it down to in further parts to the level of the atom, etc.? So are atoms conscious? So this is a very speculative gray area, and both seem to be making very definitive claims in regards to the consciousness and the level. Are atoms conscious or not? Are they sentient or not? I mean, this is if they continue in this direction, well, we're not gonna it's not gonna go anywhere productive, at least. But the thing that does emerge is one thing that we scientists recognize, that there is consciousness. Now, either you're going to explain it away, as some atheist scientists do, or you're going to recognize it and try to account for it. And then you have run into different sort of views in regards to, okay, is it just a byproduct of the brain? Is consciousness just a byproduct of the brain? Is it an illusion created by the brain, or is it a real thing which is linked to the brain? These are the different sort of perspectives you'd get. Deepak also seems to be someone that believes that consciousness is one consciousness which is spread throughout the universe. It seems like that seems to be his view. But let's see where this goes.
A fundamental error to say that because a complicated thing has a quality like sentience, musicality, mathematical ability, and is made of atoms, therefore the atoms have sentience, musical ability, mathematical ability, etc. They do not. Atoms have to be arranged in complicated organizations complicated structures interacting with each other, and then you will get emergent properties such as sentience, such as poetry, such as mathematical ability, such as spirituality. These things do not inhere in the atoms themselves, or if they do, you've got a hard job to prove it.
Okay, so Dawkins, in a nutshell, has sort of given us his position in regards to consciousness. His view is that it's the arrangement of atoms which form the brain that then results in consciousness. So it emerges. Consciousness emerges from the arrangement itself, and not that the individual's atoms in and of themselves are conscious. Now, I can see how this would work for a naturalist and atheist, because he hasn't clarified yet whether he believes it's an illusion or if it's a real product that emerges from the brain. But his view is, what he's suggesting is that consciousness is not something that's separate yet linked to the brain. It's not an independent entity. It's something that comes about because of the arrangement. It's just a byproduct of the brain. That's what he's essentially saying. And that's the typical sort of naturalist perspective. That's the view that they would hold. It's like saying, when you make, you make a machine of different parts, but it's only when you put the different parts or pieces of metal together that they then serve a certain function, and then that function emerges from those parts coming together. Whereas if you were to separate those parts and keep them separate, you wouldn't get that function, because that wouldn't emerge as individual bits and parts. So he is sort of making the typical atheist, or holding the typical atheist position in regards to consciousness, which is it's just an emergent property of the brain itself. It's not a real entity that exists in and of itself, which is linked to the brain in some way, shape, or form.
You have a hard job to prove it. Can you prove it?
I'm sure you're aware of the hard problem of consciousness. I'm sure you're aware that we have no science that tells us why we have any experience, whether it's mental, subjective, or it's an experience of the objective world. How photons coming and hitting our retina create the experience of a three-dimensional reality in space and time. This is the hard problem. It's the most fundamental problem in science. First, what is the stuff of the universe? And second, why is there awareness of the universe? Is awareness of the universe and the universe the same thing? Because if there was a universe outside of your awareness, for all practical purposes, you would never know it. So to say that sentience is an emergent property is assuming that only brains produce consciousness, whereas in fact, even a single fertilized cell, when you were conceived, was fully alive, was fully aware, and did not have a brain. It was present, it was aware, and it differentiated into trillions of cells, more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, to create who you are. So to say that sentience requires an emergence through evolution, instead of saying that actually evolution could be driven by consciousness, these are the questions that some people are asking. And if you propose that sentience is an emergent property, then answer to me why there is no science that can actually give us an explanation to the two most fundamental questions of our existence. What is the nature of the universe? What's it made up of? And why is there sentience? Why is there sentience? We talk about sentience as not just human sentience, which is, of course, an evolutionary process, but sentience came from sentience.
Have you seriously?
Evolution does not explain the origin of life. It only explains the transformation of species.
Yes, you changed the subject again.
Yeah, so to be fair, Deepak does seem to be, although there are links between what he's saying, he does seem to be jumping from one thing to the other, which is maybe because it's a debate, maybe this is his style, I don't know. But he does seem, and that seems to be further irritating Dawkins, because for one, Deepak is there as he's a scientist, yet he's using language which, from an atheist scientist perspective, is crossing all bounds, because he's injecting in spirituality. There's a lot of speculation on Deepak's part as well. So you can see why it will really irritate someone like Richard Dawkins.
Have 1 minute and 1 minute, and we will finish with this topic of the universe. And
Have you seriously just said that a single cell has consciousness?
A single cell has awareness.
What do you mean by that?
That it has the ability to respond to its environment.
Of course it has the ability to respond to its environment. That is
So-
not consciousness.
So you said a while ago, atoms get together to create complexity. How do they get together?
By processes which are well understood
By a
biologists.
process which is random or intelligent?
Not intelligence.
Okay.
By the processes of embryology put together by the processes of evolution. You cannot seriously sit there and say that the hard problem of consciousness, and it is a very hard problem, is solved by saying that a single cell has consciousness.
A single cell has sentience in the fact that it can respond to its environment and express its biological autonomy.
But,
What
okay,
are you applauding?
just 1
What are you
second,
applauding?
please. Un segundo, por favor. I think we're in a little loop because we cannot prove either things.
You know,
I want to nail this. I want to nail this. This gets to the root of the problem.
it does.
Consciousness is something very, very complicated. Of course, we don't understand it. That's why it's called the hard problem. It's something that happens when brains reach a certain level of complexity. Now, a single cell, a single neuron, a single amoeba, a single cell, a thermostat even, has sentience in your sense. But
Has-
that is nothing to do with...
Has the ability to take in information, process information, and respond with autonomy. That is sentience.
That's trivial. That's utterly trivial.
You're confusing perception with awareness. Perception is not fundamental reality.
That's a fair
if there was
point.
an insect
That's a fair
with
point.
100 eyes looking at me, it wouldn't experience the same me as you are. So perception is a species-specific and culture-specific experience in consciousness. It has nothing to do with fundamental reality, the awareness that differentiates into what we call, in us anyway, cognition, perception, imagination, insight, intuition, creativity, choice, freedom, the desire for meaning, purpose. All of that are expressions of awareness as consciousness and influence everything that we experience in life.
You think a single cell has that? And you think
A
a single
single
cell
cell has a rudimentary form of awareness.
Do you think
and
an
we
atom
have-
has that?
Sorry?
Do you think an atom has that?
According to Freeman Dyson, yes.
Freeman Dyson says an atom has awareness.
Yes, sir. Check it out.
These guys are,
Señoras y señores, un aplauso para los dos.
Check
¡Qué
it out.
extraordinario!
Also,
I mean,
What's-
look, guys, this is quite entertaining because both Deepak's personality and Dawkins' personality. I mean, it's almost like, the combination is the perfect combination. Like they're getting to each other, and but we're not really getting anywhere as far as really getting to the sort of base points and covering sort of the key sort of areas they should be. I really want to see this discussion going down.
Second, please. At the end, the problem is that we cannot prove it very well, and we'll talk about it in that. But just 1 second. Can you a little bit about the topic? The second box of our dialogue has to do with science. I have been very surprised
This
that
will be
you, for
interesting.
example, you mentioned, well, both of us, we share the same background in biology, in medicine, in science. The question is, how come that you share the same scientific background and you differ so much? My question is, are there two types of science, or he went to a school that it was not really a very good school, or you went to the wrong school, or what's going on here?
See, this is a brilliant question by the moderator, and this is the crux of the matter. This is one of the reasons I wanted to do this, to highlight to you guys that when it comes to both are scientists, yet they have two totally different ways of connecting the dots. looking at the data, looking at the observations, right? And this is inevitable, brothers and sisters. And this is why it's very important to realize that when you hear, evolution is true, right? Or this is true. It's there's the scientist bias is always involved. Remember, the atheist, naturalist scientist is always going to want to take the data, the observations, and connect the dots in a way that fits his narrative, right? This is very important to realize. And someone like Deepak Chopra, who's more of a mystical, spiritual type of guy, who is also a scientist, now when he connects those same dots, the same data, he's going to see it totally differently. He's going to come to totally different conclusions. Okay, they may merge to a degree, as we've seen so far in this debate, where they both seem to recognize consciousness, is a phenomenon that needs to be understood. It's there, but how they're explaining it, I mean, they're going to explain it. They're both explaining in totally different ways because they have totally different worldviews that they come from. So every human has a worldview, and a worldview allows for us to interpret reality. We need it. It's every human needs a worldview, a lens through which they interpret reality, interpret everything. Now, even scientists have worldviews. You have atheist naturalist scientists. You have spiritual, sort of semi-spiritual, mystical scientists. You may have Christian scientists, Muslim scientists. That is it's inevitable that their bias, their worldview, is going to have an impact on the way they connect the dots, right? It's you can't run away from this. And if we understand this, then whenever an atheist naturalist scientist such as Richard Dawkins, who have become very popular, who we hear from a lot online and so on and so forth, when you hear their views, you have to remember what's coming out of their mouths is not necessarily, bias-free science. It's not. It's their opinion, their interpretation of the data, right? So therefore, there's always room for error, even on this level, in regards to their conclusions. It's possible the conclusions may be right in some cases, may be wrong in some cases. So don't take it as gospel truth, right? Whenever Dawkins says something, it's very important, even for atheists, to realize this. You will even get two atheist scientists who disagree with each other on certain matters. Right? It's just because remember, Bertrand Russell defined this when he explained science. What did Bertrand Russell say? He said science is an attempt to discover by means of observation, right? So we observe the world, collect data, and then reasoning based upon it. That's where the problem is going to come in. You don't even have to see it as a problem. It's just inevitable. When the scientist reasons upon the data, he is connecting the dots. Now, how he connects the dots, he may not even realize he's doing this. It may just be subconscious. Based on their worldview and their perspectives on life, they are going to connect the dots in a particular way. And those dots could be connected in many different ways. It doesn't have to be connected in one way, right? So you'll see this. It's inevitable, this issue. So I think it's a brilliant question asked by the moderator here.
Or there is a physics quantics for you and for... Please explain me, how could you share this background?
Would you like to go first, or you want me to go first?
3 minutos, por favor.
My attitude to science is that we are fundamentally trying to understand how things work. Science is very difficult. It's very difficult to understand how things work. The hard problem of consciousness has been mentioned, the problem of the origin of the universe, the problem of the origin of life, the problem of how life has this uncanny appearance of being designed, the size of the universe, the scale of the universe, how embryology works. These are all deeply difficult questions. They require hard scientific work. And in all cases, I think I'm right in saying that scientific work consists of explaining complicated things in terms of the interactions of their parts or of simpler things. So we always try to explain complex things in terms of simpler things. We do not resort to magical language. We do not snow our audience with highfalutin sounding words that don't actually mean anything. We use words that actually have meaning. We use expressions that can be tested. We work hard at understanding the universe in terms of its component parts. We don't invent superarching entities which have no explanation in themselves. We don't invoke ideas like the universe has consciousness, the universe has awareness, atoms have awareness. If we have a difficult problem like awareness, we explain it in terms of the interactions between small parts working together in ways that scientists understand. If Freeman Dyson ever said atoms are aware, then he's wrong. I don't think he said it. I think he should sue you.
Wow.
Okay, so just on what Dawkins said there when explaining science, now this is very interesting. What he's alluding to is what you would refer to as methodological naturalism, right? This is a method. This is not to be confused with philosophical naturalism. These are two different things. Philosophical naturalism is more of a worldview, a position which Dawkins holds. Okay, methodological naturalism is a principle or component of science, which is that that scientists are obliged to explain phenomenon through natural processes. So they have to explain things via other things that could be observed and tested. Okay, that's just the way, that's just one of the limitations of science. Now, that's not to, and again, Dawkins is very good with his words, right? He's very good at brushing things and smoothing things over, right? It's not to do what he does either, which is to use it in a way as a tool to deny God or the supernatural, right? Which he does. His book's all about this, right? So he needs to apply the same to himself, which is if he wants to stick to the science and the scientific method and the principles of science, then stay within the framework of science. Don't try to now deny the supernatural, because look, science can't directly prove or disprove the existence of the supernatural, of God. It's not in the scope of the scientific method. Science is limited to the observable, right? Now, sure, methodological naturalism is a principle. You have to stick to it. Whether, okay, is it, fine. From a scientific perspective, you accept it. You use it. Okay, I have to try to explain a certain phenomenon naturally, the how of it. But it doesn't mean that there is no supernatural or metaphysical explanation to the material phenomenon. Just because science can't deal with that sphere, science can't go into that realm and now start looking at these metaphysical supernatural explanations to material phenomenon or cause or effects. It doesn't mean that there isn't a supernatural explanation as well, right? So you can have two levels of explanation. But what Dawkins tries to do is he tries to completely deny the supernatural just using the science, and you can't do this. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's like, I think John Lennox, he explains this really nicely. He says, look, there are different types and levels of explanation to many things, right? So you can have the how type of explanation and the why type of explanation. Science deals with the how type of explanation, right? So he gives the example of a kettle. Imagine, I'll give you this guys, this scenario. Imagine I come to your house and the kettle is boiling, right? Now, why is the kettle boiling? Well, you can tell me that the kettle is boiling because, it's plugged into the mains, the switch is on, which is the current is running through the plug. It's heating a coil inside the kettle. And as the coil is heating, is raising the temperature of the water, and then the water eventually gets to 100 degrees Celsius, and the water starts to boil, and the kettle is boiling. Well, that's an explanation. That's how the kettle is boiling. You can say that's why the kettle is boiling as well, but it's more of a how explanation. But at the same time, an equally valid reason for the kettle boiling is, well, I wanted to make a cup of tea. That's why the kettle is boiling. So there's different levels and types of explanation. Science deals with the first type. It tries to understand, okay, the how of the material physical world. It can't go into explaining the why. It's not the realm of science. Now, just because it can't deal with that level, what people like Dawkins try to do is they try to deny the why using the how. You can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. Well, you can see why an atheist scientist would want to do that anyway, right? Whereas Deepak Chopra on the other side, what he's trying to do is he's trying to intermingle the why type of explanation into the how type of explanation as well. So he's bringing it all together. So he's in a way breaking or going against the principle, and he's in his right to do this. He's going against the principle of methodological naturalism, and some people in ID, intelligent design, would also do this as well, which is fine. I mean, look, just because science, the method of science, stands the way it does today, and it has the principles it does today, it doesn't mean it's the only way. I mean, scientists previous to the scientific revolution, and without the influence of the logical positivists in the 1920s, science was, if you look at science, I mean, science in the Muslim world, historical science through history, people did science. right? But they never shied away from the why type of explanation as well. People, even scientists in the West, when they first started to engage in the scientific discipline, they did it because they understood that there was order behind the universe. They were people who were proponents of natural theology. They understood that there was a mind, a cause behind all of this order. And the reason they did science was to try to understand this cause. Whereas science today, the secular, if you look at it, secular science, if you like, or it has which is fine. They've got their principles, they've got the ways of doing things. It works for them. It's fine, but it doesn't mean that. Point being, just because there is no, just because science can't deal with the why explanation, it doesn't mean there is no why explanation.
3 minutes.
Ad hominem is a logical fallacy, science 101. I'm not going to resort to the tactics that you use, sir. Friedman Dyson said it, and so did Schrödinger say that consciousness is in the universe. Max Planck said that mind is the matrix of matter. I could go on and on about the pioneers of the early physics, the quantum physics, who were compelled to include consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality. Consciousness is the white elephant in the room. You require consciousness to come up with a theory. You require consciousness to design an experiment. You require consciousness to make an observation. Science is the offspring of consciousness. It is the product of consciousness. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say here is very clearly that there's no argument about the fact that evolutionary biology explains everything about the species going from one species to another. But if you want to understand science in its totality, you have to bring consciousness into the equation, because as we currently practice science, it's based on what we call a subject-object split. There's an observer involved in every observation. Science doesn't ask who the observer is, who's the observing self, where is the observing self. But in the absence of the observing self, there wouldn't be any observation and there wouldn't be any science. The observing self cannot be glimpsed by science and scientific methodology because it happens to be the observer. The observer cannot be observed. And that's where spirituality comes in. If you define spirituality as self-awareness, only consciousness can know consciousness. Only consciousness can explain consciousness. Only consciousness can understand consciousness. Any scientific understanding of consciousness through looking at the brain is at best inferential. You're looking at correlations of experiences in consciousness through objective means. So I think science is incomplete as a way of understanding fundamental reality. It's based on a fragmented view of reality. Subject-object split. Nature is one. The universe includes observers, modes of observation, and objects that are observed. So science, because it's fragmented, like religion, which has been fragmented, is capable of creating diabolical technologies. Everything that is wrong today in the world, from global warming to biological warfare, to mechanized death, to eco-destruction, to the extinction of species, is because science has evolved without the evolution of spirituality.
Thank you.
Science, spirituality,
okay.
Science.
Now.
So we'll wrap it up here, inshallah. I'll just give some concluding thoughts on this, because I think they're going to keep going on about the whole consciousness discussion. But I think Deepak's made some really profound points, although Dawkins doesn't seem to be taking him seriously at all at this point. The first thing he highlighted, which I thought was very interesting, he says, science requires consciousness, and this is true. You need a conscious observer, right? These are some of, you can see as an assumption or an axiom of science. You need a conscious, rational observer that's doing the science to do the science in the first place, right? So consciousness precedes science itself. Okay, therefore, trying to explain it away via science would be just like going a dog chasing its own tail, going around in circles. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that's one fundamental issue, which is very interesting. The other thing he goes on to is some of the disastrous effects of science without spirituality, and I think that's another very interesting point. Now that maybe they're going to a discussion on this, we don't know, but I think it's true, because you look at science. Science is a powerful tool, right? And it's led to loads of discoveries and advancements and so on and so forth. Now, science without spirituality, if you look at it specifically from the perspective of, if you have people that don't believe in God, that don't believe in a creator, therefore don't believe in accountability, therefore can't ground morals and ethics in any objective way, which is the inevitable outcome of this, denying God. You can't ground objective morals in any objective sense. Well, then you have a free reign. There is no accountability. There is no real objective right and wrong. Then now give such a person a powerful tool and method, such as the scientific method and all of these technological advancements, you're going to run the world into the ground. And that's what's happening today, essentially, right? Like you said, global warming and all of the way we're destroying the planet is because of our advancements. Let's put it this way. There is no criteria. If there's no criteria or structure, if there's no structure or limits set, then you're going to run wild, right? Especially when you, again, have a type of philosophical materialism as a mindset, which is it's all about this world, it's all about progressing in this world and making as much as you can. Well, then you're going to use science to exploit the world. And we're seeing this, we're just because of our desire and hunger for more material goods, consumerism, we are producing more things, we're consuming more things, and in the process we're destroying the world. And this is all a result of science being misused. So he's made a very, very valid point here. When you don't have that grounding, when you don't have that framework, when you don't have accountability, well, then you're going to run wild and you're going to do whatever you want to do and however you want to do it. And we're seeing the effects of that today. But anyway, just to wrap it up, I think some of the sort of take-home points from this discussion of what we've seen of it so far is, number one, it gives us an insight into the psychology of science, if you like, or the psychology of scientists, which is very important, guys. We need to realize this because, people are swayed by the words of people like Richard Dawkins and, Sam Harris and these atheist scientists. But we don't really realize their psychology, which is, look, these people have a worldview, which is fundamental, which comes first. They are atheists, they are naturalists, and it's inevitable. Their worldview, their way of looking at reality is going to affect their scientific conclusions. It's bound to happen, right? And this is why, for them, they want to make sure that, take evolution as an example, they want to ensure that this puzzle is complete. So whenever they find a fossil, for example, some sort of evidence, they're going to want to try and fit it in a way that fits their narrative, that completes this picture, so they can say, look, this is how life evolved and this is how humans evolved from these previous species, etc. Whereas someone like Deepak Chopra, for example, as an example, who isn't a naturalist, would take the same data, the same observations, and connect the dots in a totally different way. Right, so there's the human bias is at play, and it makes a big difference in the way scientists formulate their conclusions. That being said, also one thing we can also appreciate and recognize, well, there is, even according to science today and scientific research, that there are realities which really break down naturalism as a philosophy. That, which suggests that all that exists is matter. It's all physical. It's all material. Well, no, then you have the consciousness. How do you explain consciousness? Now, obviously, in this discussion, they were going into a lot of this, breaking it down to the level of, okay, where does how do we understand consciousness? Is it on a level where atoms come together and then form a brain which is conscious, so it's emergent, or is it, atoms in and of themselves have consciousness to a degree, or awareness, as Deepak Chopra was putting it? These are discussions that they can have, but what stands is that you have a phenomenon, which is consciousness, which from a scientific perspective, scientists see as the hard problem of consciousness, because you can't really explain it. You can't quantify it. You can't just brush it aside and say, oh, it's just something, it's just an illusion that the brain produces. It's more than that, right? Everyone has a first person conscious experience. You can't just explain this away. And that first person conscious experience, you can't test in a test tube. You can't measure it in a test tube. It's beyond matter. It's beyond physical. Now, how it interacts with the brain, all of these things are other questions, the bigger questions. But at the very least, it highlights that there's more to the world than just the physical, than just matter. They spoke about how about dark matter, and how there are which is true, because at least 99% of the observable universe is not material. It's empty space. Now, how do you explain that? There's a lot more going on. When you look at it on a quantum level, there's things happening on a quantum level which can't be explained via the principles of science as they stand today. There's things that really seem like they break all of the laws of science. So there's a lot more going on, guys. Even for the atheists, it's something really important to consider, that there is a lot more going on. There's a lot more to the world than just matter. There are other ways of coming to know this world other than just the scientific method. Science isn't the only way to truth, right? I mean, we could just see from the perspective of the way scientific bias, or the bias of scientists plays a role. And, even if you remove that level of the bias of the scientists, just the fact that science is based on induction means that there's always room for error. No scientific theory is going to be 100% true. And if you understand all of these things, well, then you realize, we need to just relax when it comes to science. When people are saying, oh, evolution is 100% true, God doesn't exist because of evolution, all of these ideas that people throw out there, we shouldn't be impressed with them too much. We should just relax and realize, okay, science is a method. It deals with the physical world. It doesn't get things right all the time. There's scientific bias based on the worldview of the scientist that's giving us these conclusions. Observation's always limited. All of these limiting factors. So it shouldn't affect us as Muslims, especially. It shouldn't affect your iman, because it shouldn't affect your faith, because it's a method that's dealing with a certain aspect of reality, and it's just trying its level best to try and understand reality, and it can never give you 100% conclusive facts about reality anyway. So that being said, I thought it was an interesting discussion. For me personally, I mean, one thing, like I said, it highlighted very clearly just the level of how far the bias of the individual goes as far as the conclusions that they make. This is a big take-home message from today's live, I guess. We'll do more of these. Let me know if you guys want me to do more of these sessions where we do analysis on certain debates between different people, and we can do more of these inshallah as well in the future. But let me know in the comment section below. Until next time, take care, guys. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.